All right, good morning YouTube. In today's video, we're going to be talking about bench press plateaus. This is a video I actually wanted to post yesterday, but the weekend got away from me, and then yesterday was a lot busier than expected, so trying to catch up. And if you're following my programs, today is your bench press day. I know Monday is usually International Chest Day, but for power building, I actually think it's better to train it on a Tuesday, mainly because everyone is doing bench on Monday. So rather than waiting around for a bench to open up on Tuesday, they're always going to be open because everyone's doing other things. And now you have a free open bench. So that's typically why upper body days come second in my training. But for you, hopefully you can use this either in your second bench press day or your next week training session, depending on how you have your training split set up. But bench press plateaus are very common. For one, the bench press, it's a movement that it belongs in the big three. Like, it's the upper body movement of the big three, you know, the squat, bench, and deadlift. But the thing is, it doesn't belong exclusively to power lifters. What is interesting about the bench press is that it's actually more of a bro lift than it is actually a strength specific power lift. Usually if you have a strength focused athlete asking another strength focused athlete, they will talk about their deadlift or their squat, but usually among bros, they'll still have that very common question of how much do you bench, bro? And that is something that needs to be addressed, because who doesn't want a bigger chest? Who doesn't want a bigger bench press? So let's get into the actual video. So the first thing to understand, how to properly build bench press strength. The squat and deadlift get away with higher intensities, meaning you can train with lower rep ranges, you can train with heavier weights with the squat and deadlift, and they'll progress just fine. I've never really noticed the need for me to kind of throw other things at my squat and my deadlift other than doing a little bit more weight, doing a little bit more reps, doing a little bit more sets than I did with the bench. A lot of the things that I could have done that I did on my squat and deadlift, if I tried to do it on my bench, it just did not work for me. The things that worked on my bench were very different than what worked on the squat and deadlift, and the thing that worked the most was a volumizing approach, was a bodybuilding approach. Bodybuilding typically requires that you do more volume anyway. For me, because I was morbidly obese growing up, my calves and my legs, you know, like just having to walk was enough of a hypertrophy response for them. So for me, they actually are big enough for my personal desires as far as a ideal physique goes. So because I only care about the strength of my squat and deadlift, it made sense that because my strength was going up, that anything else that I need to add, any plateau that I reach for them, was able to be addressed through, you know, strength parameters or strength suggestions, then it was fine. But with the bench press, I noticed that my strength would suffer if I didn't do basically bodybuilding, if I didn't treat the bench press to some degree as a bro lift. So another thing that you want to keep in mind with building strength for the bench press, this is going to be something that is kind of strange, I guess, but you do need to keep training intensity high. So like I said, the squat and deadlift get away with training higher intensities, but now I'm telling you to keep training intensity high for your bench press. What gives? Reason being is because you don't want to lose your ability to strain. You don't want to lose your ability to use heavier weights. The bench press is something that, strength in general is something that it is a skill. You need to maintain the ability to lift heavy year round. You need to have that neuromuscular efficiency year round if you actually want to have your strength grow over time. So you need to understand that strength is not completely linear after the novice phase. So I do want you to exhaust linear periodization and progression for as long as you possibly can. For your first year of training, or maybe like your first 2-3 years of training, depending on how friendly linear periodization is for you, just keep sets and reps constant and add weight every week. 5 pounds every week, 10 pounds every week, whatever it is that you're able to get away with, so long as your technique is able to stay crisp, so long as your technique is good, so long as your form is good, so long as your form is safe. As long as you are able to maintain those things, sets and reps stay constant, weight goes up each week, that is perfectly fine. The issue is, I was not very gifted athletically my entire life. I was just big. So linear periodization did eventually exhaust itself, and I was then met with a very difficult time where I was just like, what the hell do I do now? Because I was following things like starting strength. I tried 5-3-1, but because it's not really ideal for building strength, I would plateau on that a lot. I would try other linear periodizations, but same thing would happen. I would just plateau really, really quickly. So I had to kind of like think about other ways to get better. And the first thing that needs to happen is you need to accept slower progression is a reality. You need to understand that eventually the 5x5, adding weight every single week, is going to stop working. It's not magic. It's not a sign of your genetic limitations. It's not that at all. It's just a reality of the situation that after a certain point, after you develop a certain amount of strength, strength gains slow down and you can't add weight all the time. And now the manipulation of sets and reps, your volume, now becomes something that you do need to consider. So that's one thing you need to accept with strength over time. The next thing is that on volume days, you should do things like plus sets. So I'm going to be going into some practical applications such as increasing your frequency on the bench press and doing plus sets on your volume days, your size days. This is something that's going to help a lot. The reason why I don't really recommend you do this on your strength training days is simply because you're lifting a lot of weight and you want progression on those days to be a bit slower, to be a bit more structured. Whereas on size days, size being something that is very much influenced by your proximity to failure, you want to kind of be right on the edge of that zone in your main sets, but then on the last set, push as far as you can, and then that might actually be enough of a stimulus to push progression on your bench overall, and that's good. The next thing would be to ease into new weights. So this is kind of what is going to be on the strength day. Evolving rep ranges and step loading. These are the two tools that I think matter the most for strength progression when you're a power builder. Because if you're just going for strength, if you're getting stronger, that whatever progression system you're using, that's good. You're lifting more weight over time, that's good. Because if your goal is just pure strength, sets and reps doesn't matter. It's the weight that you're caring about. So long as the weight is going up, you're fine. But as a power builder, meaning you're going to accept a slower rate of progress in strength at the expense of actually being able to build muscle at the same time. And this is actually very good for building a better base and potential for more strength in the future. Then you're going to be using something like an evolving rep range or step loading. So I do need you to understand that you will need to get used to straining if you are trying to get better at any strength lift, but especially on the bench press, because like I said, I'm telling you two different things. One, you need to increase your volume, and two, you need to keep straining. So what is the solution there? It is concurrent periodization or non-linear periodization, undulating, whatever you want to call it. And you need to understand that it is an absolute godsend. When I was telling you about how I hit that plateau really, really hard, and I was just confused about how to actually continue making progression, it was the discovery of concurrent periodization and non-linear periodization that has helped me the most. Now, the thing that I've learned is that you can actually kind of mix progression styles. I wouldn't take a bodybuilding program and a strength building program, smash them together, do both of them at the same time and say you're doing power building. That's horrible. But what you can do is, I'm going to use a concurrent approach on my bench press, but I'm going to use a more linear or block approach for my squats and deads. That is pretty easy to manage. That is something you can do. But with a concurrent or nonlinear approach, what I will say is you should have a clear distinction between two different types of days. I call them strength day and size day. The reason why I like to use this kind of language, a strength day and a size day, is the fact that rather than, let's say, a volume day or intensity day, you can't separate these two variables because volume without intensity is useless and intensity without volume is not really conducive to building muscle and building a base of strength. So a strength day means you're skewing your volume and intensity for the purpose of development of strength, whereas on a size day, you are skewing volume and intensity for the purpose of size. So that's why I call them strength and size days. The advantage to this is the fact that you will be getting a 2 times per week frequency. Frequency is very important for strength development. It might not be the most important for hypertrophy. In fact, it's probably not important at all for hypertrophy so long as volume is equated across different programs. Whether you train your muscle once per week or twice per week, the hypertrophy is going to be about the same. But for strength will not be the same if you train it only 1 time a week versus 2 times a week. So for the purpose of strength, being a power builder or a strength focused athlete, you need more frequency in your program because strength is a skill. The more frequently you practice a skill, the better you get at it. The issue is you can't For most people, you can't train certain movements every single day, mainly, especially if you do, then you'd have to use such light weights because you're literally only practicing technique and not getting any type of meaningful load involved at all. But you're not using too much frequency because, you know, you can kind of jump off the deep and be like, oh, if I practice something more frequently, why do something 2 times a week when I can do it 5 times a week and progress 5 times as fast? Reason being is because your joints, your connective tissues, your CNS, these are things that do not recover 5 times as fast. So 2 times per week, it's a safe zone. Most people can do 2 times per week frequency on something like the bench press and have very little issues on their recovery and progress from there. Like I said, this touches into the idea that you get more technique practice, and technique is very important. You need to work on your technique as much as possible on your warm-up sets, on your strength sets when you're lifting heavier weights. When you do volume work, you need to make sure that as you get more fatigued, your technique actually stays more crisp. This is things that you need to acknowledge and keep in mind in the intent of each rep you perform. And like I said, volume intensity are things that cannot be divorced. It's just they are skewed in different directions depending on you are doing a strength day or a size day. Now, here are some options for improving your straining. The first one is a daily max. Now, if you are doing a daily max, you're essentially doing a variation of a top set or the max effort method. One thing that is really important to understand is that if you use this technique, RPE should be capped at a 9, not a 10. Now, this, by very definition, means you're not training to failure, but you're training close to failure. And that is more than enough for strength gains, more than enough for safety. It's able to be progressed, and you're good. This is why and it's also much easier on your recovery. You're able to actually build strength endurance rather than test your strength endurance. So if you were to do a top set, if you are to use the max effort method, go to a 9, not a 10. This is something that I have taken from Matt Wenning, and it's something that allowed me to progress fairly well on conjugate, or peak fairly well on conjugate when I did it for about a year. The next thing, different percentage thresholds on strength days versus size days. This is what I touched on, talking about how volume skews on strength days and size days. So on strength days, you will typically train 80 to 92.5% of your 1 rep max. You're going to be training within that range. Now, that means, let's say you keep, you select 85% of your max and you just try to progress in sets and reps using that weight, and then you add weight when certain performance thresholds are met, and then you go from there. One thing to keep in mind is, like I said, rep ranges are indicative of intensity. So if you're using the 80 to 92.5% of your 1 rep max, you're not using the 10 to 15 rep range. You are not using the, you might not even be using the 6 to 10 rep range, depending on how much strength endurance you have, and stuff such as that. You're probably using something closer to the 2 to 5, the 3 to 6, and the 4 to 8. Now for size days, you're going to be using closer to 60 to 75% of your 1 rep max for your main work. For me, one thing that I'm doing is I'm actually trying to get my 225 bench press to about 30 reps. Right now I'm at like 19. So, slowly but surely getting up there, but that's about 60% of my max, because I think 60% of my max is like 227, so slightly below that. But generally speaking, it's practically enough, and then I'm just trying to build up the volume through there, and then I use other bench press variations or other pressing variations that fall within this range and allow me to get more volume done, because in the 60 to 75% rep range, now you're doing things in the 6 to 10. Now you're doing things in the 8 to 12, possibly even the 10 to 15, the closer you are to 60%. And that allows you to accumulate more volume, get a better hypertrophy stimulus than you would with lower rep sets. And now you're able to get a bigger muscle for pressing, and also train your ability to use that muscle to strain. Those two things will feed into each other. The bigger the muscle gets, the better you get at using that muscle. And then it just feeds into one another. And then that allows you to continue to progress on your bench press. If you are plateauing on your bench, one thing I will advocate to you to no end is, are you training the bench in 2 different ways? Are you getting more volume on it? Are you getting better at straining using that movement? You can't just rely on one or the other, because, like I said, they build into one another. If you kind of lack that variable that helps build your potential on both ends of it, that's why it plateaus, that's why it struggles the most. Whereas with the squat and deadlift, you can just kind of use intensity progressions for quite a long time and they will be fine. But for the bench press, I find that not to be the case, especially because you just might not have big enough muscles to press more weight. That's something that you need to consider, and to some extent that happens on the squat and deadlift, but because they're really good at building muscle even with lower reps, it might not be the case for you. But I'll make videos on that topic if needed. But that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. My name is KarelSaking, standstrength.com. I will see you in the next one. Peace.